42.
Because of the funding problem that stopped the equipment coming, that's why they stopped building the seawall. And then cyclone pressures just come and wash everything out.
It is Eye on the World, of course, with Selwyn Manning. Thanks very much to scoop.co.nz. Good morning, Selwyn.
Hey Glenn, how are you?
Good, thank you. And of course that intro hints on where we are focusing today. It must be the Pacific, of course, with the Pacific Islands Forum getting underway here in New Zealand for the first time in a wee while.
Yes, it is. It's the first time in quite a while, actually. The Pacific Island Forum gets shared around the Pacific region on a yearly basis. And what is significant about this one, Glenn, is the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He's been in the Pacific and significantly has arrived in Auckland, New Zealand, where he will be attending the annual Pacific Island Forum. The leaders of the Pacific, it's an annual event, and they discuss these big issues impacting on the world's most expansive region, which is our home here in New Zealand, of course. The big issues to be discussed this year, we are told by the New Zealand government that they include sustainable energy challenges for the Pacific Island states, natural resources and commodities. That's all the fishing kind of issues. Those have been discussed right at the moment with the smaller island states. We've got commodities, security and sustainable development and social goals. So they're all broad topics. But in amongst those broad topics is some real meaty stuff. Now, Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, at first he arrived in Australia and he was obviously talking some very big issues there with Australia Prime Minister Julia Gillard, including Libya and many of the world's big security issues. But this one here, this little track here from Julia Gillard is showing how the focus after Australia was certainly on the Pacific and New Zealand, Glenn.
But we're pleased to welcome him, and we are delighted that he will proceed from here to the Pacific. He will be going to Kiribati personally, he will be going to the Solomon Islands, and then he will attend the Pacific Island Forum in New Zealand. He is the first Secretary-General of the United Nations to do so, and we very much value the fact that he is taking the time and the trouble and travelling the distance to be physically present in the Pacific. This is, of course, a region vital to us, Australia. It's the region in which we live. I'm looking forward to attending the Pacific Island Forum, and I thank the Secretary-General for attending that forum and being the first to do so.
And of course the leaders will be focusing on issues that are far-ranging and quite wide-ranging, from natural to man-made.
Yeah, that's right. Now, as we heard from Gillard there, that the Ban Ki-moon, he was going to visit and has, must say, visited Kiribati up in the north from New Zealand there, and also the Solomon Islands. Now, these two island states, Glenn, they represent two distinctly different challenges in this region. Kiribati, it represents, obviously, the global challenge of how to curb the rise of the world's sea levels. Now, these are big issues, but for Kiribati, it is huge. You know, like we know here in New Zealand, Kiribati is very low. It's a low-lying kind of group of atolls, and the rise in the sea level is already making a swamp out of much of that land. And there's a bit of a track here, a clip here, Glenn, from UNICEF, who has been speaking to Kiribati youth about their concerns.
You know, climate change is a really big issue for us, you know, the young people and children of Kiribati. And we always ask ourselves, what is the future for us, you know, as a people?
We are the front of the front line, and we want the world to listen to what is happening to us.
Our islands are really very low and narrow. But it's not only frightening storms. We've had no rain for many months, and the drinking water in a lot of our wells has become salty. You can't drink it. Most of our food and protein comes from the reef, but the rising temperatures have begun to destroy them. You know, as young people who will be leaders of tomorrow, you know, we're not just sitting around doing nothing. You know, we're trying to do something about this issue.
I know it's a horrible terminology to use, but Kiribati really is the poster child of the climate change issue in the Pacific.
Yeah, it is, and this is why it was very significant for these powerful people like Ban Ki-moon to actually visit these places that are at the front edge of the impact of climate change. With Kiribati, Ban Ki-moon, after he visited there this week, he made a statement where he's saying Kiribati will strengthen my belief, my conviction that this climate change is a much more serious security issue. And he put that issue there on security issue. That means a lot to many of these people that visit there. I think on your program, Taraida, he spoke about Kiribati most recently, Glenn, and came back with some really, really disturbing kind of reports there about many of the people with just nothing to do. Now, the Secretary General, he added that he would take Kiribati and the Pacific's concerns, what he said was, back to the world, to the United Nations General Assembly. So that's every nation on earth that is a part of the UN at the General Assembly once a year, and that's coming up very soon. He's going to be raising these issues there. And also at the climate change negotiations in Durban later this year, and the Rio 20 conference on sustainable development in 2012. Now, the other thing that we mentioned there was the Solomon Islands. Remember that these two countries have different kind of issues, and Ban Ki-moon visited the Solomon Islands as well. Now, Solomon represents, regional stability, especially as Melanesia adjusts to this post-colonial period and redefines a state of nationhood in a way. Now, the Solomon Islands, of course, had descended into civil war. The fractures are still evident, but the country is progressing towards stable government and society with the assistance of many, many players, and that goes back to 2002. The Prime Ministers of Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Solomon Islands, PNG, Vanuatu, Samoa and Tonga and others met in Townsville in Australia on an Air Force base, and I was up there myself at this thing, and they all sat down and they signed what was called a non-aggression pact. And while the ink was still dry on that document, thousands of soldiers from all of these nations that we just mentioned, they left Townsville Air Base for Honiara, the capital of the Solomon Islands, and since then the Regional Assistance Mission to the Solomon Islands, or RAMSI as it's called, has assisted the Solomons to become more secure and establish some practice in good governance and civil society. There's a long way to go, but as you can see from this clip coming up, the Australians, they've been putting a lot of money into it, as has New Zealand, but by proportion Australia is really at the front. And the Defence Minister, Stephen Smith, recently was visiting Honiara.
Australia's Defence Minister Stephen Smith made an early start to what was a very busy day in Honiara by visiting troops manning an observation post perched high above the country's main prison. Down there is where leading militants from both sides of the ethnic conflict have been held. The Regional Assistance Mission's Special Coordinator told the Minister a lot of effort had gone into fixing the prison service.
I mean, there will be 6 correctional service facilities and a population of 525,000 people.
This observation post is
so that there was Stephen Smith there in Solomon Islands.
Yeah, and most significantly, Glenn, on that one is that what he was looking at there was some basically prisons that were holding some of the people that were charged and convicted of crimes in the Civil War, and there was always been problems relating to making sure that those prisons are secure and that those people are held in there. That's one of the roles that the military have been increasing on their role over there and doing. The United Nations Secretary General now, he has been over there and witnessed, in a sense, how a relatively, stress the word relatively, successful regional military and police force has assisted stability in that island nation. There's a long way to go, but obviously these types of things, these big lessons that the other players around the world can learn from such missions as the RAMSI one, obviously. Now, other Pacific Island states here in Auckland, they're highlighting their plight too, and the common issues are often caused by exploitation of natural resources, and again it always comes back in so many cases, Glenn, like you would know with your show, the climate show that you have, that climate change is right at the forefront of those. And take Tokelau, for example, 3 atolls known as Fukuofo, Nukunonu and Atafu atolls. Now, that's a part of the Tokelau group, and they sit about 350 nautical miles north of Apia, Samoa. Now, Tokelau is administered by New Zealand. It's virtually self-governed by a population of around 1,500 people shared amongst those 3 atolls, and it has rotating leaders known as Ulu. Now, the atolls, they're susceptible to oceanic storms, so a bit different to Kiribati. I mean, it's not so low-lying, but particularly it's susceptible to these tropical cyclones that have become more severe in recent times. And I had the privilege of being up in Tokelau a little while ago, back in 2007 in exact, and here's a little part of a man who was talking to me about how the coastline of Tokelau is disappearing, Glenn.
It used to be land. As you can see, you can really tell where the trees are. The erosion of the land.
I see. I can see where there used to be palm trees.
Yeah,
the old
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
That's
where the land used to be, and then from there to the point to the coral. The only options we can think of is put on seawalls, but the program stops because of the funding.
So seawalls cost a lot of money, don't they?
Yeah, they do, and Tokelau and New Zealand, they work with all of these players. The EU, of course, is active in these kind of areas of the Pacific, but big donors like UNDP, or Development Programme of the United Nations, they're all kind of trying to pitch in. But as you can hear from the man on Tokelau back then, they were having a lot of trouble in getting commitment for the money to kind of buy materials to build these seawalls. And we're talking seawalls that are, a good metre or so high right around the whole country. Now, these atolls are tiny, but that's all that they have there. And these oceanic waves, when there's a cyclone, they just eat in, and it's a never-ending kind of chew on their coastline there. I can tell you from having been there that when a cyclone hits, Tokelau, Nukunonu Atoll in particular, in parts of it, that atoll, it becomes totally submerged under the ocean waves. Now, its people, they take shelter in a large concrete building that's constructed to withstand such storms. But when that cyclone hits, its low-pressure system acts like some sort of giant vacuum cleaner. It sucks up the level of that ocean to a higher level than normal, sometimes many metres higher. And there's a place in the village, near the village's school there, called the David Longy Building, named after a former New Zealand Prime Minister, of course. Now, these Pacific Island waves during those cyclones, they meet with the lagoon at that point, and basically the atoll was swallowed up. And there's a very quick clip here, Glenn, of that same man telling us about that.
The waves from the ocean and the waves from the lagoon, they meet somewhere around, probably somewhere around here, on the edge of this. Because the strongest comes from the ocean, and the weakness comes from when they meet and they bring all the rubbish and everything. After the...
And so all these kinds of issues will be discussed at the forum this week.
Yeah, it is. And the constant message that we get from people from these places, Glenn, is that they don't want to be victims of climate change catastrophe. They'd rather want to be seen as examples of climate change adaptation and success stories and how to beat it. Now, those messages are there. They are the ones at the front of basically a worldwide problem, and that call is always going out to, often in many cases, just give them a hand to be able to keep their own existence. And just a bit of a quick plug, Glenn, to David Roby and his team of 9 postgraduate students who are doing a fantastic job covering the Pacific Island Forum in Auckland. And if people want to keep up with these issues and see what's happening right across this forum, then go to that website, Pacific Scoop, or pacific.scoop.co.nz. They're doing a great job.
Nice one. And of course, you can see this interview as a video once more up at scoop.co.nz. That has been Selwyn Manning. Thanks very much.
Okay, Glenn. Bye-bye.